Bruce unloaded his car after parking at Grove State Park. His children, Alice, age 8, and Junior, age 4, bounced around him asking questions as he dragged their lightly packed camping gear from the trunk. After gathering all their things and making sure the kids had their backpacks secured properly, Bruce led his children up the path towards the first available campsite they could find. Alice and Junior were very excited to take this trip. They would have preferred for their mom to join them, but she had an important business meeting that could not be missed. In fact, this meeting was the reason for Bruce taking his kids on the camping trip overnight. This way his wife would have the peace of mind to properly prepare for her meeting. As the family made their way up the trail, they passed a sign that seemed equally confusing and ominous. "Leave more than you take," the sign said. Bruce seemed confused by this posting. Wasn't the saying, "take more than you leave"? But he was quickly distracted by his kids picking up random objects that they saw on the forest floor. About halfway up the quarter-mile trail, the family started to notice that the shape of the trees began to change. The trunks of these trees exhibited a distinct curve, almost as if the large canopies of the trees forced the trunks to bow under the pressure. Even more curious than the bowing of the trunks was the fact that the trees were in perfect rows next to each other, almost as if somebody had placed them there, or planted them, or even encouraged them to grow by hand. It wasn't long before they reached the first clearing where the first campsite was set up. In the middle of the clearing was a pre-made fire pit surrounded by a large circle of finely crushed gravel. Bruce set up his family-sized tent and his battery-powered space heater that he packed because Alice was terribly afraid of campfires. While the kids unpacked, Alice had a panic attack because she realized that she had left her favorite doll in the car. She hid it under the front passenger seat because she hadn't wanted to share it with her brother, who always wanted to play with her toys. With any other doll, she would have been perfectly fine leaving it in the car. But this doll was special because it was crafted by her mother when Alice was still in her belly, and she'd had it ever since she was born. Especially since her mother was not able to be on this trip, the handcrafted doll gave Alice comfort. Alice began her frantic attempts to get her father to take her back to the car so she could retrieve her doll. However, Bruce was so focused on getting the camp set up that he didn't want to go all the way back to the car. Even though it was only a quarter-mile away, he wasn't going to pack everything back up and tow both kids to the car just to retrieve a doll. And he certainly couldn't leave his son there or let his daughter run off by herself. Alice was not very happy with this. She groaned and complained and whined that she would not be able to sleep without her doll because the woods and the curved trees were scary to her. She said that they looked like bony hands with spindly fingers coming down on them. Thinking quickly and trying to resolve the problem, Bruce convinced Alice that he could help her make a new doll just for this trip. This would help comfort her and would also serve as a cool memento of their shared time together. Alice thought about it for a moment and then agreed, mainly because she always wanted her dad to make a doll with her, but he never seemed to have time. Bruce, Jr., and Alice searched the nearby tree line for supplies to make the doll. Bruce used a bandana, some sticks and leaves, and a paracord that made up the strap of his wristwatch to make the rough shape of the doll. Alice then used her hair ties as accessories to put her personal touch on it. Crisis averted, Alice was once again content, and the family spent the rest of the night laughing and looking up at the clear, star-speckled sky until they fell asleep. A few hours later, Bruce woke up to the sound of sharp winds rattling the partially open zipper of the family tent. Looking over to see his 2 children peacefully sleeping not too far from him, Bruce knew that his family was safe. But he still needed to check the weather after a more sharp wind gust slightly shook the tent. Bruce stuck his head out of the tent and looked up at a dark sky. He saw deep gray clouds threatening a torrential downpour at any moment. Bruce wondered if he should head back to the car or bunker down and ride out this possible storm. In his research of the area before making the trip, he found that it rarely stormed in this forest, so he wondered if the deep clouds would recede with enough time. Bruce reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his strapless watch. To his surprise, it was just after 6 a.m. local time. The sun should have been on the horizon, but the dark clouds shrouded the sky and suffocated the sunlight. He started to feel uneasy. They were alone at this campsite, yet he felt like he was being closely observed. Shaking off the uncanny feeling, Bruce decided to pack up and head for the car rather than braving a storm in unfamiliar territory. After quickly waking his kids and packing everything up at the campsite, Bruce started his way up the path to the car. With his daughter being a slow riser and his son being wide awake and ready for an adventure, Bruce carried his daughter on his back, while his son bounced along by his side, holding his hand. Alice, still partially asleep, used both hands to hold on to her father's shoulders while she tucked her doll in between his back and her stomach. This way she could assure she didn't leave the doll behind. Halfway to the car, the family looked behind them and realized to their dismay that the forest, well, it was turning pale and wan as they left. Bruce wasn't sure if he could believe his eyes. After all, he had woken up with very little sleep and was hyper-focused on getting back to the car. Alice, on the other hand, had time to further examine their surroundings. She noticed the animals in the forest laying down on the forest floor. As the trees began to lose their color, her eyes widened in shock. They filled with fear as the animals seemingly began to sink into the earth and were slowly consumed by the pale roots from the bent trees. And although the sight disturbed her greatly, she had twisted her body to look at the animals. In doing so, her doll fell from the spot it was tucked away. Junior, who had merely not noticed the sudden burial of the animals behind him, saw the doll drop from the corner of his eye. He stopped walking and stared at the doll as it laid on the forest floor, as if he were in a trance, as if the doll was calling to him. He stared blankly for a few moments until he finally bent over to pick it up. Junior stared into the doll's eyes deeply. Its silent gaze mesmerized him, and he mumbled quietly to it. Noticing that Junior had let go of his hand, Bruce stopped to see what was wrong. Wanting to beat the rain, Bruce shook Junior in an attempt to get his attention, but it didn't work. Junior was so deep in the trance, it was as if he didn't hear anything or see anyone around him. Bruce put Alice down and kneeled in front of Junior to see what was wrong. Before he could snap Junior out of his trance, Alice noticed that her brother was holding her doll, and she snatched it from Junior's hands. The poor boy flinched, snapping out of his trance. When Bruce asked Junior if he was all right, Junior showed Bruce's hand where a visible splinter from the doll had pierced his palm. Bruce gently held Junior's hand in his own palm and was immediately perturbed. Black veins started to quickly branch from the boy's hand and make their way halfway up his tiny forearm. Before Bruce could properly react to the situation, Junior fainted and fell into his father's arms. At that moment, Bruce knew that something serious was going on, and he had to get the kids to the nearest town as quickly as possible so his son could get medical care. Without further thinking, Bruce picked up Alice and ran the rest of the way to the car. After rushing to his car, Bruce loaded his kids in and put his son in the front seat so he could comfort him as he made his way to town. Alice kneeled on the back seat looking out of the rear-view mirror as her father sped off, watching the forest as it paled in their wake. After a sweat-inducing 45-minute trip to the town center, Bruce found a small clinic that had a walk-ins welcome sign illuminated. Bruce quickly grabbed Junior, who was unconscious, and rushed him into the clinic. Bruce tried his best to calm himself and to explain what had happened, but his frantic delivery confused the receptionist until she saw black veins that had spread up Junior's arm. The receptionist immediately rushed Junior into an empty room and went to alert the doctor on duty. Bruce did his best to comfort his son while Alice watched from just inside the doorway, nervous and afraid of what would happen to her brother. In a matter of moments, the doctor rushed in to check on the boy without closing the door for privacy. The receptionist stood in the doorway watching the scene. Bruce proceeded to tell the doctor about the chain of events that led to the boy being sick, while the doctor looked at the boy's hand and used his tools to pull out the inch-long splinter from the boy's palm. After hearing Bruce's story and examining the splinter closely, the doctor suddenly looked grim. When the doctor looked up at his receptionist, who was still standing in the doorway, his grim expression turned into that of desperation. Noticing these changes in the doctor's demeanor, Bruce looked at the receptionist too. There she stood, with both arms crossed, face red with anger. She walked away, shaking her head. The doctor responded by hurrying to the door and closing it behind her. The doctor then frantically turned to Bruce and began to explain the folklore of the bent trees, and how many people in the town believed that the trees determined the prosperity of the town. It was told that many centuries earlier, this town experienced a major drought that threatened to ruin the small community. Fields dried up. Livestock starved. Farmers had little choice but to eat their livestock in order not to waste the meat and starve themselves. With the lack of water, the sanitation of the town also suffered to the point where several of the townsfolk became very, very ill. Everyone thought this was the end of their community, as people perished, and some even made plans to leave for other towns that had a better supply of water. Then the eldest of the elders from the town died as a result of the sanitation problem. When the community mourned this elder, they decided to bury her in the nearby forest to honor her with a final resting place within nature, and also to keep her decomposing flesh far away from the already diminished water supply. A ritual was performed, and the remaining elders recited a prayer that was passed down from their elders. To the shock of all, after the prayers finished, thunderclouds formed over the forest, and it began to rain for an entire fortnight, saving the town. Ever since then, the community buried their lost townsfolk in those very woods that Bruce and his family visited, and in those very spots grew the trees that began to bend at their trunks as their canopy spread. Some people believed the bending of trees symbolized the heavy knowledge held in the canopies. Others believed that the curve in the trees symbolized the violence of humans in nature. But regardless of what they believed, they all collectively thought that this land was sacred, and disturbing it could lead to dire consequences. Hearing the doctor tell this story, Alice interrupted him and told him about the trees going pale as they had left the forest. The doctor looked at her and Bruce and asked if they took anything from the forest. Bruce, still in shock from hearing the story, said, "No." The doctor pushed further, asking if they took anything at all: a stone, a stick, a flower, a leaf to remember their trip by. That's when Alice reminded him about the doll they made, and she pulled it out of her backpack along with the one that her mother had made to show the doctor. Seeing this, the doctor quickly finished wrapping Junior's arm and gave Bruce some ointment for his son's wound. Solemnly, the doctor looked at Bruce and told him that the old story about those sacred grounds warned that if you take something from the woods, you must make a sacrifice to rebalance what was taken from nature. If they didn't go back, he warned, whatever curse had fallen upon them would persist. Bruce protested that he would never sacrifice one of his children, and asked the doctor if there was another way. The doctor stated that he didn't know, and as a man of science, he wasn't even sure if he believed in the supernatural. But he had witnessed things since being posted in this town that science could not explain. The doctor also knew that the townsfolk reacted harshly to what they perceived as outsiders disrespecting the balance of nature. The doctor peeked out of the door before closing it again, and said that the receptionist had probably already alerted the townsfolk about the boy being sick. The doctor then looked at the children with tears in his eyes, and told Bruce that he needed to get to the woods and make a sacrifice before the townsfolk got to them. And if they didn't, the townsfolk would sacrifice the entire family in hopes to satisfy the spirits of the forest. Without further hesitation, Bruce gathered his kids and rushed out of the room, passing the receptionist who was on the phone, glaring at him with disdain. The family loaded into the car and sped off back in the direction of the campsite. When Bruce looked in the rearview mirror, he could see 2 pickup trucks full of people pulling up to the clinic, and a few people ran inside, undoubtedly to talk to the receptionist about the cursed family. Bruce drove frantically towards the forest with agony on his brow and tears in his eyes. Should he sacrifice himself? If he did that, who would take care of his kids? How would they get back to their mother? Which of his kids could he sacrifice? How would he even choose? Would he even be able to go through with it? What would he tell his wife if he did? At that moment, he realized that he hadn't talked to his wife all day. He grabbed his phone from the inside central console of the car, where it had been all night because there was no phone signal in the forest. Bruce saw that the phone was going to die because he didn't think to charge it after his son fell ill. He reached out to grab the phone charger, and when he finally got his phone plugged in with one hand, he looked up and saw a speeding pickup truck closing in on them. It wasn't one of the 2 trucks that showed up at the clinic. The receptionist or the townsfolk must have called more people to intercept them. The man and the woman that occupied the truck aggressively tried to run the family off the road, as Bruce yelled out of the window, begging them to leave them alone. It was hard enough for Bruce to make a painful decision about sacrifice. After some very tense maneuvering between the 2 vehicles, Bruce was able to outmaneuver the truck and force them into a ditch along the roadside, crashing violently. Shortly after, the family arrived just outside of the edge of the forest, where they entered the woods the night before. Even though it was early afternoon, the forest was dark and cold. The bent trees were so pale they looked white now. Bruce jumped out of his car and grabbed his still unconscious son. Alice followed close behind her father as they ran into the forest. Bruce ran as fast as possible without leaving his daughter behind. When they got to the first campsite, they saw 3 townsfolk sitting around a campfire, seemingly praying to the spirits in a foreboding ritual. When the townsfolk turned around and saw the family, they immediately rushed in their direction. Before Bruce could do anything, 2 of them grabbed him, and the other, a teenage one, grabbed Alice, who tried to offer the townsfolk the wooden doll that she held in her hands. Bruce was held down by the 2 townsfolk as he tried to shield his son from their grasp. All the while, the teenager struggled to control Alice as she thrashed about, trying to get back to her father and brother. Alice dropped the wooden doll and screamed as the teenager carried her toward the fire. Only feet away from the fire, Alice bit him and was dropped to the ground. She kicked him in the knees and he doubled over in pain. Alice ran away from him to the other side of the fire and reached into her backpack. Seeing that his daughter was in trouble, Bruce fiercely fought to get to her. The teenager saw that Bruce was putting up much more of a fight than they expected. He picked up the wooden doll and ran towards Bruce, leaving Alice to her own devices. Alice reached into her backpack and pulled out the doll her mother made. She kissed the doll on the forehead and hugged it tightly. Then she threw it into the fire. The sudden burst of flame flared bright with heat, grabbing the attention of the captors as more townsfolk arrived up the trail. The flames were so high, so bright, so intense, that everyone and everything went silent. As the doll burned and the people were transfixed by the dancing flames, the forest began to revert back to its vibrant green state, and the sky started to clear. The black veins on Junior's arms began to recede as he slowly regained consciousness. The townsfolk gathered closer to the fire to finish their ritual and to marvel that the spirits had relented their harsh punishment. The strong hands holding Bruce back released him, and he picked up both of his kids and began to quickly and quietly walk out of the forest. Just as Bruce passed a mob of townsfolk who had just arrived, the teenager that had attacked his daughter fell to his knees with an ill expression, as he realized he also had a splinter from the wooden doll embedded in his palm. Bruce and his family kept walking as the mob turned their attention to the teenager.